Well, thank you so much, Marco. My name's Tim Harford. I'm a writer for the Financial Times, and I'm going to give the panelists 2 more minutes to rest on the front row before I invite them up one by one. I'm really delighted to be here in Milan while the British government still allows me to travel. This may all change in the spring of 2019, so it's good to see Europe while I still can. And it's particularly good to be here discussing the issues that we're talking about this evening. I wanted to tell you a little story, not just because it's in my new book, which has been published here in Milan in the last week, I'm delighted about, but also because I think it teaches us something about the importance of innovation. The story begins 25 years ago when an economist called Bill Nordhaus went out into the woods behind his house, took an axe, and chopped down a tree, chopped it up into logs, let the logs dry, and eventually brought them into the house, set a fire, and sat by the fire for several hours with a Minolta light meter, measuring the dull, flickering flame that was given off by this fire and making a note of it. Another day, he bought an antique lamp. He was told it was from the Roman Empire itself. I'm not sure that's really true, but in any case, the lamp looked really old. He filled it with olive oil. He lit the olive oil, and it burned with a steady flame. And again, Bill Nordhaus sat there with his light meter, measuring the light that was given off. And he did the same thing with more modern candles and with incandescent light bulbs. And what he was trying to do was to measure the amount of effort, the amount of labor that it took to produce this simple thing, which is light. You know, light to cook by, light to read by, light to talk by, that we take for granted. And what he found is that over thousands of years, the technology of producing light had moved from lighting a fire to the oil lamp to the candles. And at each stage, there'd been this huge leap forward in what was possible. The quality of the good that was being produced. And the price was falling. The American sort of founding fathers, George Washington, spent thousands of dollars a year on candlelight. Benjamin Franklin celebrated in his diaries the amazing spermaceti, the sperm whale oil, and the quality of the candles that it produced. And people really valued light. But Bill Nordhaus's data series showed that today, you just flick a switch, the LED comes on, you can have hundreds of hours, thousands of hours of high-quality light for basically nothing. It costs you nothing. You don't even need to think about it. Whereas previously, you could have worked all week to produce just a few hours of light to read by. And this same process of innovation is taking place all around us. And it's so easy to take it for granted. So easy also to forget that perhaps over the last 20, 30 years, that process has been slowing down. And what we've heard from our panelists has been an exploration of where these ideas, where these inventions come from, the processes that produce them, and some of the details that can matter so much. It's very easy to take innovation for granted, but we shouldn't. It doesn't come from nowhere. It comes through the institutions and the processes and the brilliant thoughts that people have. And so that's why it's so important to be discussing where innovation comes from, how we can share new ideas, and one of the most productive institutions to encourage it. And that's what we're going to be doing this evening. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce the panel. Sometimes one has a very high-quality panel, and sometimes one has a very diverse panel with lots of different experiences. But it's very unusual to have a panel that is so diverse, but also so professional, so experienced, such interesting insights they're going to bring to our discussion this evening. And I wanted to introduce the panelists one by one. Before I did, we have a short video. I don't know, I just wanted to check. Is it possible to play the video? Yeah? Can we just take 1 minute to play the video?
We come from different places. from different cultures and backgrounds. Science brings us together. Together, we mix logic with intuition. Together, we push the boundaries of what's possible. Together, we can solve vast problems, and microscopic ones, too. Together, we save lives. But divided, we can't. More than ever, science needs us to join together. Together, science can.
So that video was sent to me by Ilaria Capua. Ilaria is a professor at the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at the University of Florida. She is formerly a member of the Italian Parliament, an expert in virology and vaccines. Please join me in welcoming to the stage our first panelist, Ilaria Capua. So, Ilaria, before I invite the other panelists up, I just wanted to ask you, why did you send me that video? Why is that important to you?
Because science is all about sharing. Now we can share, we have the technology, and it works. However, we have to be very cautious that at times we can misuse sharing, and it can be very difficult, actually, to manage the progression of science and improving health, and also respecting privacy and respecting the interests of countries and national interests. So it's not as easy as it looks, and often devil is in the detail.
Well, thank you very much. Now, sharing is important, so we should share the stage with some other panelists. So I want to introduce Diego Piacentini. Diego, welcome. Go on. Let's see. So you can tell that Diego used to work for Amazon because he's like that. He's so fast. He now
coming with a drone.
He used also to work for a small company called Apple. I'm not sure what happened to them, but I think they're still active in the innovation sphere. But Diego is now a government commissioner for the digital agenda.
A continuous growth.
Yeah. So just tell me, you've had these fascinating corporate experiences. Why did you move into government? What attracted you there?
Choosing the answer versus what I just heard is to allow sharing of information and data. I'm going to, and I'm not joking, I'm going to discuss a few examples during the panel. But when I saw Professor Montagnani's presentation, I was weeping in joy. I was seriously almost crying, because everything she was talking about, I'm experiencing every single minute of my day. And we're trying to sort those things out. And I believe that thanks to technology sharing, the cost of technology going down, open source software, we will have a different way of managing governments in the future. Now, obviously, there has to be a cultural shift. I mean, I used to say, apologies, we need more computer and data scientists in the government and less lawyers. That's the point. And we should imagine a government, not just Italian governments, 20 years from now, and look back to this kind of presentation and say, that's where he started.
There you go. I mean, this is really what Bocconi is famous for, lecturers bringing people to tears. Tears of joy, hopefully. So many congratulations. You've affected our panelists already profoundly. Let me also invite to the stage Carlo Torniai. Carlo is the head of data. So Carlo's head of data science and analytics at Pirelli. Prior to that, he was an academic and also worked for Tesla, the car company, the car company, perhaps for the modern age. Carlo, this idea of just giving ideas away, just sharing downstream data, Tesla was famous for this, right?
Yeah, it was famous for that because I actually remember the day when entering at Deer Creek at Palo Alto, California, the Tesla headquarters. We used to have what we call the wall of patents, where all the patents that the Tesla filed were displayed there, and one day disappeared. It was a bold move to say, okay, we're giving everything that we discover to the public. So yes, I'm very familiar, and we come to that. I think that not all the companies may have the luxury that a company like Tesla has, or Facebook for that matter. But yes, so we can definitely talk a little bit more. I remember, Tesla has all the patents are public now, but again, there are conditions under which you can do that maybe not every single company can meet.
Yeah, I think we're going to discuss how all these details matter. And so our final panelist is the head of cabinet to Carlos Moedas, the European Commissioner for Research, Science and Innovation. Here's Antonio Vicente. So, Antonio, welcome to the stage. Why don't I'm going to ask this question for all the panelists, but why don't I start with you? So, based on your own experience and the decisions you have to wrestle with day to day, what do you particularly want to highlight in the presentations that you've heard that you found is particularly relevant, or that you found was controversial and you don't agree with?
No, I mean, I'll go into some of the particulars during this debate, but I found the three of them fascinating. I think there are two broad themes. One on the first presentation, very much about the very worrying decline on the R component of R&D. I would argue in a minute that I think it's even worse than that diagnosis based on my experience helping manage this program called Horizon 2020. But I'm also a little bit more optimistic on the future. And I think there was another broad theme that for me as a policymaker is important, which is the two last presentations, this idea of open innovation, open science, how amazing it is, but also how messy it is.
Yeah. So what should the European Commission be doing to encourage more open science?
I think we are doing what is our obligation, but we should be doing even more, which is to improve public funding for innovation. These kind of things we're talking about, the private sector cannot go alone. There have to be partnerships between the public and the private. There has to be a better regulatory environment for this kind of innovations to happen. And there has to be more support to science, because most of these innovations have a deep scientific background.
So, Carlo, let me ask you the same question. Just to reflect based on the challenges you face at Pirelli, what did you notice about the presentations that rang true, or that you thought, oh, no, that's a surprise?
Okay, so one thing I have to say, I may agree with the overall trend on R&D, but I have to say in Pirelli, we have still a very, very strong tradition of investing in basic research. Probably one thing, because we are surrounded by many great university institutions, one of the reasons of the decline was instead of the born of the internal labs was you couldn't find university around these big companies. But at Pirelli we have a long-standing tradition of even right now doing basic research, for instance, on materials or chemical process that is really relevant, and we have strong collaboration with universities on the open innovation model. So that's one thing. The other thing that resonated with me is always the two words sharing. I think that as we mentioned even in the government, but the idea of digital transformation, besides creating new tools, or is supported by a mindset of knowledge sharing and collaboration and transparency and trust, which even at the ecosystem level of a company is really important. As you probably see in the government, or as you probably see in science, I see that what I think about digital transformation in Pirelli, I think a lot of sharing of information sharing of, collaboration, work instead of silos, work, cross-functionally, and at the same level, I think, on government, for instance, or more broader sense, a scientific institution is one thing that is an enabler. It also has to be enabled by the digital transformation.
Well, when you say Pirelli has this tradition of doing basic research that runs, as we've seen, this is not the current fashion. This was very popular in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, not so popular now. Is that because the economics are different for Pirelli, or is that because of something softer, like the attitude or the history or the culture?
I think probably a tradition, a culture, and as I said, the environment in which Pirelli has, surrounded by such great institutions. This is probably the main thing. And I have to say, that on another trend in terms of sharing, Pirelli is a big manufacturer. I see moving as a trend, not just Pirelli, moving from selling goods to providing services. And this is a global trend. So in order to do that, even from a manufacturer perspective, you need to break your company walls and start sharing information, even if not at the level of private public data, but at least on the value chain, you have to start sharing data, for instance, or on a trade ecosystem or dealers ecosystem in order to provide services to our final clients, in order to do better usage of energy, for instance. So I see this trend that you can't really think anymore about sharing information across your institution. You have to start sharing data, information, downstream and upstream to better serve your client and eventually also to be profitable. We just launched this system that is called Connesso. We have sensors in tires, and we provide customers with information about temperature, pressure, but also other, safety information about the level of wearing of a tire. And this is a system that can help the whole ecosystem of dealers and other partners along the value chain to be more effective in what they do. So I see also this trend of breaking walls, more and more all over again. And last thing that I want to say, and then I stop, about making private data public. That's really interesting. I used to work in research, and I was part of, the first Obama big project of American Recovery Act. It was Eagle Eye, to share research resource information, not just private. It was a big effort, like millions of dollars, just to know what other universities were doing in the US. I would like to see more data from company shared and made public, but I think one condition in here, first, there has to be a big problem to solve, kind of a gain, and also, some kind of law, not just enforcement, but, kind of support. That's what I see. For instance, I'd like to see collaboration on energy consumption a lot. And how do we be better use of data and do energy grid on an effective way across manufacture across Europe, or recycling. And just getting rid of waste, which is in our case of rubber, is a big problem. That kind of big problems, I think, are interesting for starting, even with competitors. Sharing data, sharing information. But there has to be need of legislative and administrative support for that.
Thank you, Diego. You've already told us that you were moved to tears by Maria's presentation. Why is this so important? What?
The point is, let me get into the specific of her presentation, and then obviously also the presentation of Mr. Gambardella. Professor Gambardella was more about sharing in general. I'm going to start from this part, the sharing in general. I don't want to be misunderstood with my next statement, because it might seem strong, but the point is that today, in the way that governments work, and especially the political part of governments work, open data and sharing of information, sharing of technology would reduce the job of those politicians by 90%, because all they do is sharing information. I'm very serious, right? The moment that we get information in whether it's under the form of data, under the form of software, under the form of documentation, and you make it public and available, a lot of their job is no longer needed. the current job. That's why they need to evolve. So let me give you a concrete example. We just meaning May 2017, published the 3-year digital transformation plan, which is of the public administration, which is an okay document we put together. I mean, it's not one of the things that 10 years from now we're going to look back and say, wow, that was awesome from my team. Other things will, but not this one specifically. But there are 3 things that are really important that we put about that. First of all, and this is part of the flexibility that you mentioned, the rules that you mentioned, the 3-year digital transformation plan will be updated once a year. It sounds obvious, but it's not in the government, because everything you write is fixed, it's done.
Yeah.
You just need to be compliant. So we got to the point that it's going to be updated once a year. I want it to be a continuous update, but that's already a difficult concept to put in. And we put the plan on 3 open source softwares: GitHub, Read the Docs, and Discourse for the forum. We are talking directly to the administrators, to the software house developers that serve the municipalities. And this is something we will remember. 10 years from now, we're going to look back when everybody is going to manage governments this way, that we remember this was the beginning. Now, I mean, we have growing traffic. We receive many feedback, but now it's like dozens of people. Hopefully in the future it's going to be thousands. I'm talking about policymakers, administrators, citizens, people that are experienced around that. We launched developers.italia.it, and now on that we have 7 horizontal applications of the public administrations. We opened the software of the electronic identity card, la famosa CIE, and it took me like 9 months of conversation between the software companies, government-owned software companies who produce the software, the Ministry of Interior, who owns the software, to make it publicly available, which should be by definition. So this is why I do believe that several years from now, all of this is going to be normal. So we're going through that that cultural transformation now. So this is why I was crying in joy. And there is one specific thing that hopefully a few years from now we're going to look back and say, oh my gosh, why did we do that? A lot of the technical rules of government software is written in the primary laws. Do you see what that means? It's like foolishness. I mean, technology changes so quickly that the idea of putting technology rules in a law or in a decreto del Presidente del Consiglio dei Ministri is pure foolishness. So this is why we're making these changes, and this is why I so much recognize what I read about flexibility. Mm-hmm. Don't put technology rules in the law. The law is going to be obsolete in 3 months.
Ilaria, so what was it that you heard from the panelists that spoke to your experience?
Well, a general statement that is more and more clear to me, and the more I think about it and I hear other people, it just hits me like a tsunami, is that basically the technology is way, way, way beyond the policymakers. And this is a ramification and has some gigantic implications as to how we're going to manage this. Because Dr. Montagnani, so of course I come from research and I come from the healthcare perspective, and the statements you made, they resonate with me, but unfortunately it is just so difficult to make them work. Because when you say, okay, the policies we have to make need to be global. Okay, so when you're talking about research and you're talking about healthcare, a global policy, but even about sharing basic information on, sorry, I'm a virologist, and I'm not a computer virologist. I am a virologist that works with real viruses, so we're talking about different category of viruses. But how can you apply the ideas that you mentioned, which I find challenging and very stimulating, to a problem like managing healthcare issues? And how can you expect that something which is, so already in the European Union we have diversities on how to manage certain issues. Just think of between the US and Europe, and then without thinking about Africa, Asia, India. But we all work in a globalized environment, and so it should be a dimension which is a global dimension. And you also mentioned flexibility, and it's really, really difficult to generate policies that can then be applied in so many different fields. So also when you talk about public data and private data, and in how we share this data, but what I hope to be able to speculate on later is on how...
You could speculate now if you wish.
Well, it's too long. I'm going to burn the whole... I'm going to burn the show. No. Well, let's say I can tell you on how public... I have 3 examples for you, and I need to make all 3, so I'll do one and then I'll walk into the other ones, on managing data related to healthcare. And on how, of course, that video showed very clearly how we need to work together. And we need to join all the dots, because with the era of big data, in one sample, in one blood sample, in which you look for one variable, which can be, what's your hemoglobin concentration? Okay, are you anemic? Are you not anemic? That sample is like a mine of information, which doesn't only contain gold, but it contains emeralds, it contains rubies, it contains diamonds. Because with that same sample, you can obtain so much information that can then be used to manage big trends in health, or to learn more about that patient, or learn more about that ethnic group. So let me tell you about a win-win situation in which data from a private company or a healthcare manager, like Kaiser Permanente, was put together with NIH. They created a partnership which contains...
NIH being the National...
the National Institutes for Health in the United States, that are the major providers for funds for research. So you have data from a healthcare provider, okay? Basically insurance, more medical insurance that provides healthcare. And you have a research-driven partnership. So that medical information can be used to learn more about your medical condition, and it's your situation and your health, which is put in a public or in a database. But if you put thousands and thousands of that sort of data in a database, you can basically start working on medical conditions like schizophrenia, insomnia, depression, because it's a mega trend that you're looking for. And this actually worked very well. So the data was managed properly from the insurance company. NIH funded it, and there was informed consent, which means that the data from every single person that was put into that database let's say, it was possible to look into the other variables because the patients had agreed. And this works. This is a fantastic effort which will lead us into the new dimension of healthcare and of research, because you can look at really big picture stuff. And I will leave you with this before I tell you about a negative example.
You leave us in suspense.
Of course.
Okay, we'll come back. We'll come back. So let me ask, I should, by the way, say, invite the panel to interrupt each other or contribute if you wish, or just stick up your hand.
It's hard to interrupt her on her.
No,
for me.
I might be infectious.
I've given everyone a turn, but now feel free to start fighting or collaborating. Maybe collaborating is a better word. I had a question specifically for Antonio. I've collected a few ideas in the spirit of collaboration. I've collected some ideas here from students at Bocconi.
Right.
And one student had a particular question for you, Antonio, which is it a priority at the European Commission to facilitate data sharing? I'm sure you would say yes. But the follow-up question is, so what policies are you taking to this effect, and what are the obstacles?
No, actually, I'll say no. I think it's no, it's true. I think, and this goes a little bit to what I wanted to react to the two presentations on data. I think, in a sense, this is one of those issues where everybody agrees around this nice table, this nice conversation. Everybody agrees with the value of openness, with the potential for innovation it creates. But then, faced with the hurdles, which are considerable, as we discussed in the presentations, I think it's not sufficiently high up in everybody's agenda to make it really a top priority. So I think it's not a top priority in the European Commission, it's not a top priority in member states, and it's not a top priority in private companies. I think it's a myth that we create for ourselves. In a sense, I think this is one of those typical issues where everybody agrees and wants to have, but wants the other person, the other entity to open up their data, but we don't want it in our backyard. I was very surprised that even in our area, so we have this program, Horizon 2020, which is one of the major global funds for science and innovation, and we have a policy for open science. So we ask every single scientist that we give a grant to publish their article in an open access journal. We are constantly fighting with the Elsevier's of this world, with the journals which have a near monopoly of this field and in terms of the citations and all that. And to our surprise, although they are heroes within the scientific community that contradict what I'm saying, on average, I think this is not a daily issue for most scientists. Why? Because they get open access by default, because they are in these wonderful universities where they just go to their library and they don't have to pay thousands of dollars that the library departments have to pay, but they don't have to pay it. So they don't feel the problem. They don't see the counterfactual, which is the cost of not having people in Africa, in Asia, being able to pay those thousands of dollars to access those journals. They have their own networks, informal networks of collaboration in terms of data. You know, we have this reproducibility crisis in science right now. So many times it's a fight to get the scientists to really get their data in what we call the FAIR standards, which is, accessible, interoperable, easy to find. And so I would say that on the day-to-day practice, of course, as Diego mentioned, the politicians also have huge incentives to keep their data kind of as a source of power. So I think this is one of those political issues that everybody agrees, but we all know that it's much more difficult to actually implement it. And it's one of those issues that then, when at the end of the day, it's not that high in the scale of priorities. But let me tell you, so that it's not just all negative. Let me tell you, I really believe in small steps towards a better world, and we're doing something very concrete in the Copyright Directive, which is now it's out of our doors, so it's now in Parliament and in the Council. So the member states have to decide this. But we created something which I think is critical, which is a full exemption for text and data mining. So from now on, if this gets approved, all the scientists here, all the scientists in Europe, are able to do text and data mining on top of articles and databases to whom that they've already paid for access. But believe it or not, now it's forbidden to do text and data mining. Text and data mining that sometimes saves lives, because you can do meta-analysis, you can get valuable information. And even that, it took us 2 years to fight with many stakeholders, believe me, to get that.
Yeah, just to clarify this, so the idea with text to data mining, this is where you have a computer just analyzes every word in every journal article that's been published or in textbooks, and derives insights from that.
Exactly. Try to get outliers and commonalities.
So Carlo.
Now, a question. I come from research that I really fought the battle of reproducibility and data access, but I mean, how is it difficult from the European Commission, who's funding research, to have a requirement of open access and data repository and source code repositories? I mean, probably there's, what are the, just to understand, you know, and I always thought to myself, if I was, you know, in the condition of, you know, like NIH, for instance, or, you know, the granting institution that were required by, you know, just a condition to get money. What are the, I mean, this is probably like this, but what are the barriers that you see, even if I assume an enforcement from the European Commission can really not succeed? Because
so we have an enforcement, and we actually have sanctions to scientists that do not comply. You won't imagine how much we are lobbied to lower those sanctions, to reduce those sanctions, how much we are accused of that we are just creating an administrative burden. So this is part of the problem. A second part of the problem is that most scientists were not trained as data managers, and so we are also increasing grants to help scientists and universities, because it's actually extremely hard to do. You can be a brilliant scientist, but to actually be able to organize your data in a way that then other scientists can use it, it's extremely hard. And you see that even, I don't know if you saw this week, the data from Piketty, there was a paper said that that pointed out huge flaws in the data set. But the author rightly says that this is Thomas Piketty, the writer of Capital of the 21st Century. So this is data on income and wealth inequality for 200 years. Yes. He sold more copies than I have, so I'm, anyway. Sorry. You'll get there because now the data is discredited. but basically, the author says rightly that actually Thomas Piketty was actually very good as a scientist, because he put all the data openly available, but even then it took 3 years to get the scientists to do reproducibility. So it's a mixture of factors. We do have sanctions, we do have techniques in place to help it, but it's not as straightforward as it seems.
Can I ask the panel, anybody who wants to comment, about this idea of intellectual property? Because we heard Ashish was talking about the idea that you can share information, but it has a market value, so you buy it and you sell it. You buy and sell patents, for example, and maybe this isn't a problem. You know, if it's valuable, why not pay for it? On the other hand, intellectual property can get in the way of more touchy-feely, collaborative, we just open everything up. It can obstruct ideas, for example, like using a computational analysis of academic texts. Copyright was never designed to prevent that, but somehow that seems to be the result. So to what extent is the intellectual property system of patents and copyrights, etc., obstructing innovation, and to what extent is it helping innovation, and what needs to change? Anyone, all of you.
Oh boy.
You're stunned.
I'll talk to you about the Nagoya Protocol. Okay. Anybody knows what the Nagoya Protocol is? No, this is not a good sign. So the Nagoya Protocol is let's say a product of the Convention on Biological Diversity, which is basically about each country, so I'm summarizing, this is like 500 pages, each country has the right to protect its own genetic stock, which goes from tomatoes to the very special orchid in Indonesia. And rightly so, governments, especially of developing countries, they want to protect their own stuff. They want to protect their own breeds. The diversity, the biodiversity makes sense.
And the idea would be, if there's some commercial value, there's this plant in Ecuador, if it turns out to have a medical value, then the government of Ecuador controls that. They have a patent, they have some property rights.
They have some property rights. The problem is that pathogens, viruses, bacteria, are also considered as part of genetic diversity, right? So if you get an Ebola outbreak, another Ebola outbreak, or another virus, okay, somewhere else, and that country decides that it does not want to share that information, which is essential to make a vaccine or to make diagnostics, it can say, this is my virus, and even if the whole world is at risk, so what? It's my virus, and you can't have it.
So Ilaria, just explain so Ecuador has a new terrible flu virus. Why do they want to own that?
Well, because they would like to make money out of it, because if they sell it to a pharmaceutical company, the pharmaceutical company can develop a vaccine, can develop a diagnostic. So basically, and this is a real contradiction, in the face of a new epidemic which can wipe out half of mankind, the country from which that pathogen emerges and originates can put a barrier to the progression of knowledge and to protecting itself and the rest of mankind. So what happens is, so the Nagoya Protocol, and I really want somebody to work on this with us, because like we know our own little things, but all the legal implications we don't understand. It's difficult for us. So the Nagoya Protocol has been, let's say, ratified quite recently, and at the moment what it is causing is that countries, mainly from developing countries, mainly from under-resourced countries, when they have, let's say, germplasm or a genetic resource which is of interest, they will say, wait. And you can't wait, because look at Zika, look at all the diseases that we have, look at globalization, on how pathogens move around the world. We don't have time to wait. And my former laboratory, the laboratory that I was in charge of, actually has showed me the data that they work as an international reference center. So they were receiving samples to analyze and to fingerprint. And the number of samples that they are able to look at and to analyze is decreasing, because countries that have these problems don't want to share them. So please help us. We need the lawyers.
Any other thoughts from the panel on this question of intellectual property and whether it is?
Well, I have to say, you know, I hinted a little bit in my intro. So when I was talking about Tesla and when Tesla dropped all the patents, also with respect to Alfonso, you know, the Open Computing Initiative about Facebook, I have to say that these cases, there were initiatives that were not related to the core business of both companies. But despite what you think, Tesla is not in the business of making electric cars. It's a bigger mission, a bigger vision to basically turn the old energy sources like something in the past. Even Facebook is not in the business of making computing, you know, it just, you know, and one thing, both these companies were very mission-driven, high top mission-driven, and this puts in the condition to have first, you know, a very wide breadth of your activities, and also for that particular mission that you want to achieve, also, you know, say, okay, I don't need this because my competitive advantage is not in that. So when I say, you know, there are conditions under which a particular company can drop, for instance, all the IP they have accumulated, I think that not every company can do that. On the other hand, as I said, you know, there are common problems, for instance, sustainability and energy consumption and waste, in which I think a lot of effort of sharing data and best practices, and whatever company also has patented in this field, this has to be shared, and I don't know. Yeah.
But is it true, from what you're saying then, is it true that this sharing that we hear about, that everyone feels so warm about and sounds so great, this only really happens when it's a side issue for a company?
Well, not just when it's a side issue, when it's not their main core or the one they want to achieve. I mean, this is part of what Tesla does, right? You know, most of the patents were related to the batteries, right? So electric cars, but it's not the core mission of the company. So in order to achieve that, you're willing to, you know, to spread knowledge, or even to, you know, to drop some of, you know, the things that you may hold on to, like, you know, patents.
Yeah.
But and this probably also poses another question to every other business: what is the mission?
Yeah.
You know, should we not reconsider what we're doing at the higher level and then see all other things in perspective? But I leave this as a question.
Antonio.
No, just to say that, I mean, this is the issue of IP is one of the most fascinating issues in innovation. The standard economic argument is, of course, that you need to protect, to give the incentives ex ante for people to innovate and make the effort, and then they have like a monopoly for a while. But then you have, kind of, to simplify things, you had another path, which was the path of open source, which basically you had a guy called Linus Torvalds, for example, that creates an operating system that is in most of our computers. He didn't earn a dime for that, so he just put it out in the world, and a community of thousands and thousands, even millions of people contribute to making it more robust. I think now there is a third alternative, a third model that we haven't discussed here today, which is the blockchain. It's a very overhyped thing, but actually no, I think it's underhyped. There's a lot of talk about it, but I think it's really revolutionary. Because the blockchain...
Just explain a little about the blockchain.
Yeah, so the blockchain is a
Bitcoin.
technology behind what people hear about the Bitcoin. The blockchain is kind of, it's called a distributed database, like a distributed that sits in everybody's computer if you download the system. Imagine an Excel sheet. Everybody has Excel in their computers. Imagine that you have an Excel that is unalterable because you have it in you had to have 51% of the computing power of the world to alter it. And so this technology, which is much more complex than what I'm describing, basically what it does is that it solves a major issue in the digital economy. It allows that when I give an asset, a digital asset A, to you, Tim, I cannot give that same digital asset to my colleagues here, because there is a record of that transaction that nobody can alter. And this allowed Bitcoin, but allows many other things. It allows a system where if you develop a platform, like Tim Berners-Lee did with the HTTP, and he didn't, again, receive €1 for that, you develop a platform and you can create a system where people contribute to that platform. Imagine that Facebook didn't exist. People could create a Facebook on the blockchain where the data would be with you, would be in that system. It would not belong to Facebook. And so the data would become a kind of a utility, and people could build thin applications on top of it. Imagine in the telecom industry, imagine all the pipes where all the cables go. Those pipes belong to all of us citizens. So this is the same thing. The data can belong in this system. The data can belong to you. But then companies can do a thin interface about it. I mean, it's still a very uncertain technology, but what it promises is an idea that you can get a reward. Satoshi Nakamoto, who invented this platform, nobody knows who he or she is. If you think about,
or even they,
or them,
they,
exactly.
We don't know. Yeah.
If you think he's a billionaire because the Bitcoin that he owns at the current market rate, he's a billionaire. Whereas Tim Berners-Lee and Linus Torvalds are not billionaires. So here you have a model. He doesn't seem to be very interested in that money because nobody knows where he is, and he's not selling his Bitcoins. But basically, you have a model where if you create this platform, you can actually gain from the growth of this platform. It's a very uncertain technology. I mean, as Alfonso said, this is entering a stage where all of us here probably don't have the skill set to do it, but it is very promising in terms of rewarding innovation.
Diego, any thoughts? Or I have a question specifically for you, but maybe you...
Yeah, many, but I'm jumping into what I was hearing those conversation is, are governments ready to take advantage of all of this, right? She's talking about blockchain, and today the only, really used application of blockchains is Bitcoins. And I remember I was in a meeting where someone was asking me, so when will the Italian government will offer payments with blockchain, with Bitcoins? And I really looked that person in the eye and said, okay, we still need to solve the problem of giving enough points of sales credit card devices to all the municipalities in Italy. So the point is I'm making is, and we heard that before, technology is going so fast in building potential advantages for, let's talk just about the relationship between government and citizens. And what is really, really evident is that governments are going to be suffering now more than any time else in the past, the lack of competence within governments of understanding what is happening. That's the biggest part. So what are the mechanisms that we can build, right? Because it's easy to describe this. And I strongly believe that it is doable to build competences within the governments as long as we build the processes to allow people from the private sectors, from universities to other places that can add value, to work in governments for 3 years and then go back to what they're doing and offer their contribution. At the same time, I think there is room for large corporations that are transforming the world to work closer to government to make some of those technologies more usable for governments to be modern in that sense.
Are you not worried that when in finance people complain about the revolving door? They say, oh, the top guys in Goldman Sachs, they end up in government, regulating Goldman Sachs, and they, I don't want to pick out Goldman Sachs, it's true of all the big banks. And you're saying, oh, we need more of this in technology. So are you concerned about how it will look? Are you concerned that there's the possibility that the relationship gets too cozy?
It's at the abstract level, the conversation is impossible because then we need to go into each situation. So I believe there are situations where there could be much stronger cooperation between corporations and governments in improving things with the use of technology. At the abstract level, you'll just focus on this is not going to work. Some companies will need to change their attitude for sure, in general. But I think the answer is situational. It depends on the situations.
Okay. I have a question from another Bocconi student, Stefan Duver.
Can I just make my last point?
Please
because
do, yeah,
or else
we can wait. Stefan is here, but he can wait.
It will take long.
He'll be very patient. Is this about the negative example? Or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
We were all waiting. So
yes.
Please.
Well, yeah, because so here's our gold mine with the emerald, the diamonds, and the gold and the silver. And what they do is they pull out the rock, and the whole thing collapses. So there is a case which is known as the Havasupai Case. This is an ethnic minority. They are American natives, and they are known to be particularly susceptible to diabetes type 2. And so some scientists went in and said, look, can we have your samples? Because we really want to find out more about diabetes. And so they got the samples, and they did what they needed to do. But then, because this is an ethnic minority, and because in ethnic minorities, of course, there are issues with inbreeding, so let's say breeding and mating with relatives, because there's not very many of them. Basically, they started looking at these samples, did some genetic analyses that showed some traits of genetic relation between the individuals and so on. And these Indians got really angry because for them, inbreeding is a taboo. So we all have our own problems and they have their own taboos. And so what they did was they sued the scientists. And so there was a lawsuit, and then, well, there was a settlement and so on and so forth. But basically, any ethnic minority, particularly in the US, is now very skeptical to give their samples for any type of study because they are afraid that because that data set is so precious, because it belongs to a particular group of people, that it can be exploited to understand, let's say, areas that pertain to migration of people, to genetic diseases, that they won't give any consent at all. And so here we are in a situation in which data which was collected for one objective was misused, and basically we have been going backwards now because you know, people are very skeptical to give out their information. And so we are in desperate need for lawyers.
Yeah, I mean,
lawyers.
I need data scientists, you need lawyers. We're reversing
that's why we're all here. We need.
I mean, there is another example that springs to mind. Netflix. This is 7 or 8 years ago now. Netflix released a big data set about people's reviews and what films they were watching, anonymized. And they had a big competition that can anybody get a better recommendation engine, so that looking at your reviews and what you've watched on Netflix, can you really accurately predict what films people might want to watch next? And for a long time, this was a big case study in all the business schools and the Harvard Business Review, and everyone. I wrote about it in a book about how there was this exciting competition, $1 million, and there was a lot of research progress made and collaboration. It was great. And then it turned out that it was possible to identify which customers of Netflix were gay, because you could cross-reference the anonymous reviews they'd given here to reviews they'd put on a different database, the IMDb database. And in particular, I forget how this was discovered, but there's this one woman who was not out, was married to a man, and yet somebody identified that the way she'd reviewed Brokeback Mountain, she was gay. And so she sued Netflix. And, it's complicated. Mm-hmm. It's not easy. When this data gets out there, it's so powerful, as what we've been hearing, it's not straightforward to control it.
There's also a good story. Sorry.
So I think what you describe in technology is normal. I mean, meaning that those kind of mistakes are made, quickly identified, either internally or externally, thanks to people like the one you just mentioned, and fixed quickly until the next mistake happens. So the point is that let's not think that technology is infallible. Actually, technology is one of the most fallible things. The good thing is that you can fix it pretty quickly. So those problems that you're mentioning will always be there.
Now, somewhere in the room, I think, is Stefan Duva, who I introduced a second ago, and I don't know if you're here, Stefan, or not, but anyway, Stefan had a question specifically for Carlo, but I would invite other panelists to reflect on this if they have something to say. So, Carlo, the question from Stefan is, when you're sharing information, companies have to balance the benefits of increased efficiency with the risk that you share something that turns out to be completely critical for the company. So, based on your experience at Pirelli, and of course at Tesla as well, what factors do management have to take into account when they're deciding? What do we share with our competitors, with our customers, with our suppliers, and what do we keep private?
That's not an easy question, but as I mentioned, I think this kind of decision has to be taken more and more, which is a good thing, because you have to share more. You can, if you want to be a profitable company, more and more in this sharing context or in this service-oriented context, as I mentioned, you have to share data, information with partners, third parties, and so on. So gain and share. So it's not just about business sometimes, so you have to understand, of course, what is your return, what is your risk. We saw, the privacy, cybersecurity, cyber attack, exposing yourself to any kind of liabilities, which is always a risk when you make data public. But also, I think, is what kind of company you want to be. So it's not just about how it gets you in your pocket, at some point, but really, either you really believe that there is a common value together and beyond, that it eventually is going to come into revenues in sharing as much information as you can, or you don't. I think at Pirelli as a company, we do believe that. And the hard line is, where you draw a line, where is the limit, what is, what you share, what you can share. Of course, we can't go about making all our IP public, but what we can do in order, for instance, most of our code is on, internal GitHub Enterprise, but we're going to be open source. Of course, not the part of IPO algorithm, but all the visual tools that we build for internal things will be open source, because we do believe that our code or our products will become better if shared with the community. If somebody else can see it, can comment it and use it, and we discover things that makes our products better. So it's always, again, first, a company had to decide where do you stand and make decision each case based, not just what's the gain in terms of value, in sense of, monetization, but the value that you bring, the real value as a company. For instance, have better software products, even though, part of your effort and money went into write the code that you share with the public, and somebody else can use it again.
I wanted to ask what the panel thought about the big Silicon Valley firms. Think about the Facebooks, the Googles, and so on. On the one hand, they're amazing, right? So much innovation. I think Google just produced AlphaGo Zero. It taught itself to play Go from scratch in 72 hours. It's now unbeatable. There's so much progress. We heard about Facebook making advances in the way data centers work and then just sharing that information. They give their products away for free. I mean, this is amazing. On the other hand, they're incredibly powerful. They're incredibly, it's very difficult for a competitor to disrupt these companies. Are governments are the only organizations powerful enough to cope with these firms? Are governments getting the balance right in the way they deal with these huge tech giants or not?
No, I think it's an emergent topic. I think it's on everybody's mind, especially Google has been very much on the news because of this. There was a Department of Competition Policy at a think tank in Washington that was extinguished after a blog post criticizing Google, and then they found out that Google was the founder. So you see a lot of the typical kind of habits of a monopoly, of a very powerful monopoly. Of course, at the same time, as you rightly say, they are doing amazing innovation. I think they provide a lot of value for society, but it is good that for us as a society, we start thinking also about the checks on their power. One thing that worries me a lot, there is this famous thing about the Innovators Dilemma, and that basically this is a theory by Clayton Christensen and others that says if you become too big, you become making mistakes, you stop innovating, like the example of Kodak, you invent digital photography, but then you get disrupted by digital photography because you cannot capture that opportunity. I think what's particularly threatening on the case of Amazon, Facebook, Google, etc., is that if it is right that the future technology, the future innovation will be centered around artificial intelligence, and because artificial intelligence, its fuel is data, then you have an amazing first mover advantage if you are Google, because you have a tremendous amount of data. So you could actually get in a situation where even the innovator dilemma does not come in. So I think we should worry as a society, not because they are Americans, not because we are Europeans, but I think because it's, you have to think about, we gave that data freely and in exchange for a lot of value, no doubt about that, but we also have to think what are the limits of it. It's a very difficult question. I don't think there is a straight question.
I would say that as a current Amazon employee, on a leave of absence working for the government, I'm calling myself out of this conversation.
Yeah. That seems very wise. We have just 1 minute left. So let me just ask you all the same question and we'll get a brief answer. At least I hope we'll get a brief answer. So Alfonso posed this question at the beginning of his presentation. He said, who owns an idea? So I wanted to ask each of you, do we need to change the answer that we have to that question in our culture, in our rules? Do we need to change the answer to this question, who owns an idea? Ilaria.
So I get like the difficult part, and I'm not going to answer it. I've been 3.5 years in Parliament, so I've learned how to not to answer questions. And what I can say is that if you have an idea and you share an idea with someone, you come up with 2 ideas and more ideas. And so sharing is certainly at the basis of the human, sorry, but I look at things from, let's say, the very big picture. However, we have to speak the same language.
Diego.
So owning an idea is oftentimes linked to how do I make money with that idea? Because at the end of the day, all the regulation you've seen about is, it's allowing the owner or the generator of the idea to capitalize or to make profits correctly so on the idea, either a content or a patent or some sort of solutions. So that's where you need to separate. At the end of the day, it's about what the benefit of that idea is. Can society benefit? Can governments benefit? Can citizens benefit? And how that idea can grow a market and make it even bigger and even better. I heard, unfortunately, government-owned company that manages data and they live out of data say, we're not supporting your open data sharing ideas because we would go out of business. That's a very short-term sighted. They wouldn't understand it. Actually, we are creating an economy of data, and if you create the economy of data, whole ships go up with the tide.
Carlo.
Well, the right answer is always, it depends. We know that. But I would say I would like to see the process, how we generate ideas, really changing. That's my hope. Then, as Diego was saying, who owns it, how it becomes, I think is all a whole different game. So I'm looking forward to it.
Antonio.
I still believe in incentives, and I still think it's important that you get a return, as Diego was saying, for your idea. I think the model of open source is not a sustainable model. I think the model of intellectual property is not an efficient model. I hope we invent, with the blockchain, with other technologies, a technology that is able to ascribe some of your contribution and then get you a return to it. I think whoever is able to build that will be the next Jeff Bezos and Steve Jobs.
Thank you. It's been a really remarkable evening. I would like to thank the whole team here at Bocconi for putting on the event, the AV crew, our hosts, whoever put this amazing screen up. It's been a great privilege for me. We heard wonderful presentations from Ashish, Alfonso, and Maria, and I think the panel discussion has been remarkable. So please join me in thanking everybody behind the scenes, our guest presenters, and our panelists, Ilaria, Diego, Carlo, and Antonio. Thank you very much.